Okay. Okay. That happened. Okay. What's good? What's cracking? That happened. Left behind. That's what I'm gonna read. Rest stilly mind was on a woman he had never touched. With his fully loaded 747 on autopilot above the Atlantic en route to 6 a.m. landing at Health Row, Rayford had pushed from his mind thoughts of his family. Over spring break, he would spend time with his wife and 12-year-old son. Their daughter would be home from college too, but for now, with his first officer fighting sleep, Rayford imagined Haiti Durham's smile and looked forward to their next meeting. Haiti was Rayford's senior flight attendant. He hadn't seen her in more than an hour. Rayford used to look forward to getting home to his wife. Irene was attractive and vivacious enough, even at 40. But lately he had found himself repelled by her obsession with religion. It was all she could talk about. God was okay with Rayford stilly. Rayford even enjoyed church occasionally. But since Irene had hooked up with a smaller congregation and was into Bible studies and church every Sunday, Rayford had become uncomfortable. Hers was not a church where people gave you the benefit of the doubt, assumed the best about you, and let you be. People there had actually asked him to his face what God was doing in his life. Blessing my socks off had become a smiling response that seemed to satisfy them. But he found more and more excuses to be busy on Sundays. Rayford tried to tell himself that it was his wife's devotion to a divine suitor that caused his mind to wander. But he knew the real reason was his own libido. Besides, Haiti Durham was drop dead gorgeous. No one could argue that. What he enjoyed most was that she was a toucher. Nothing inappropriate, nothing showy. She simply touched his arm as she brushed past, or rested her hand gently on his shoulder when she stood behind his seat in the cockpit. It wasn't her touch alone that made Rayford enjoy her company. He could tell from her expressions, her demeanor, her eye contact, that she at least admired and respected him. Whether she was interested in anything more, he could only guess. And so he did. They had spent time together, chatting for hours over drinks or dinner, sometimes with co-workers, sometimes not. He had not returned so much as one brush of a finger, but his eyes had hit her gaze, and he could only assume his smile had made his point. Maybe today, maybe this morning, if her cold tap on the door didn't rouse his first officer, he would reach and cover the hand on his shoulder. In a friendly way, he hoped she would recognize as a step, a first from his side toward a relationship. And at first it would be. He was no prude, but Rayford had never been unfaithful to Irene. He had plenty of opportunities. He had long felt guilty about a private naked session he had enjoyed at a company Christmas party more than 12 years before. Irene had stayed home unconscionably past her ninth month, carrying their surprise tag-along son, Ray Jr. Though under the influence, Rayford had known enough to leave the party early. It was clear Irene noticed he was slightly drunk, but she couldn't have suspected anything else. Not from her straight arrow captain. He was a pilot who had once consumed two martinis during a snowy shutdown at O'Hara and then voluntarily grounded himself when the weather cleared. He offered to pay for bringing in a relief pilot, but Pan Consensual was so impressed that instead they made an example of his self-discipline and wisdom. In a couple of hours, Rayford would be the first to see hints of the sun. A teasing palette of pastels that would signal the relentless dawn over the continent. Until then, the blackness through the window seemed miles thick. His groggy or sleeping passengers had window shades down, pillows and blankets in place. For now, the plane was a dark, humming sleep chamber for all but a few wanderers, the attendants, and one or two responders to nature's call. The question of the darkest hour before dawn then was whether Rayford Stilly should risk anew a exciting relationship with Haiti Durham. He suppressed a smile. Damn, that's what we was thinking about, cheating? The world is about to end and he thinking about cheating. Damn. He kidding himself. Would someone with his reputation ever do anything but dream about a beautiful woman 15 years his junior? He wasn't so sure anymore. If only Irene hadn't gone on this new kick. Would it fade? Her preoccupation with the end of the world, with the love of Jesus, with the salvation of souls. Lately, she had been reading everything she could get her hands on about the rapture of the church. Could you imagine, Rafi? She executed. Jesus coming back to get us before we die? Yeah, boy, he said, peeking over the top of his paper. That would kill me. She was not amused. If I didn't know what would happen to me, she said, I wouldn't be so glib about it. I do know what would happen to me, he insisted. I'll be dead, gone, finesse. But you, of course, will fly right up to heaven. He hadn't meant to offend her. He was just having fun. When she turned away, he rose and pursued her. He spun her around and tried to kiss her, but she was cold. Come on, Irene, he said. Tell me thousands wouldn't just kneel over if they saw Jesus coming for all the good people. She had pulled away in tears. I told you and told you. Say the people aren't good people there. Just forgive me. Yeah, I know, he said, feeling rejected and vulnerable in his own living room. He returned to his chair and his paper. If it makes you feel any better, I'm happy for you that you could be so cocksure. I only believe what the Bible says, Irene said. Rayford shrugged. He wanted to say, good for you. But he didn't want to make a bad situation worse. Don't do it. In a way, he had envied her confidence. But in truth, he wrote it off to her being a more emotional, more feelings-orientated person. He didn't want to articulate it, but the fact was he was brighter. Yes, more intelligent. He believed in rules, systems, laws, patterns, things you could see and feel and hear and touch. If God was part of that all, okay. A higher power, a love of being, a force behind the laws of nature, fine. Let's sing about it, pray about it, feel good about our ability to be kind to others, and go on about our businesses. Rayford's greatest fear was his religious fixation would not fade like Irene's army way days, her Tupperware phase, and her Arabic spell. He could just see her ringing doorbells and asking if she could read people a verse or two. Surely she knew better than to dream of his tagging along. Irene had become a full-fledged religious fanatic, and somehow that freed Rayford to daydream without guilt about Haiti Durham. Maybe he would say something, suggest something, hint at something as he and Haiti strolled through Heath Row to a cab line. Maybe earlier. Dared he exert himself even now, hours before touchdown? Damn. Okay. So now we leaving the car. We not finna be Rayford no more. I'm gonna warn y'all when we ain't gonna be something when we switch over, I'm gonna let you know. Next to our window in first class, a writer sat hunched over his laptop. He sat down the machine, vowing to get back to his journal later. At 30, Carmen Williams was the youngest ever senior writer for the prestigious Global Weekly, the envy of the rest of the veteran staff. He either scoped them or was assigned to be the best stories in the world. Both admirers and detectors at the magazine called him Buck, because they said he was always bucking tradition and authority. Buck believed he lived a charmed life, having been eyewitness to some of the most pivotal events in history. A year and 2 months earlier. Flashback. His January 1st cover story had taken him to Israel to interview Chaim Rosenwig. It had resulted in the most bizarre event he had ever experienced. Beginning the flashback. The elderly Rosenberg had been the only unanimous choice for Newsmaker of the Year in the history of Global Weekly. Its staff had customly steered clear of anyone who would be obvious pick as Times Person of the Year. But Rosenwig was an automatic. Carmen Williams had gone into the staff meeting prepared to argue for Rosenwig and against whatever megastar the others would typically campaign. He was pleasantly surprised when executive editor Steve Plank opened with, anybody wants to nominate someone stupid such as any other than the Nobel Prize winner in chemistry? The senior staff members looked at each other, shook their heads, and pretended to begin leaving. Put the chairs on the wagon. The meeting is over, Buck said. Steve, I'm not angling for it. But I know the guy, and he trusts me. Not so fast, cowboy, O'Reilly said, then appealed to Plank. You letting Buck assign himself now? I might, Steve said. And what if I do? I just think this is a technical piece, a science story. Buck's detractor murdered. I put the science right on it. And you put the reader to sleep, Plank said. Come on, you know the writer for showcase pieces comes from this group. And this is not a science piece anymore than the first one Buck did on it. This has to be told so the readers gets to know the man and understand the significance of his achievements. Like that isn't obvious. It only changed the course of history. I'll make the assignment today, the executive editor said. Thanks for your willingness, Buck. I assure everyone else is willing as well. Expressions of eagerness filled the room. But Buck also heard grumbled predictions that the fair-haired boy would get the nod, which he did. Such confidence from his boss and competition from his peers made him all more determined to outdo himself with every assignment. In Israel, Buck stayed in the military compound and met with Rosenwig in the same caboose on the outskirts of Hafidi, where he had interviewed him a year earlier. Rosenwig was fantastic, of course, but it was his discovery or invention. No one knew quite how to categorize it. There was truly the newsmaker of the year. The Hubble man called himself a botanist, but was in the truth a chemical engineer who had constructed a synthetic fertilizer that caused the desert lands of Israel to bloom like a greenhouse. Irrigation has not been a problem for decades, the old man said, but all that did was make the sand wet. My formula added to the water, fertilizes the sand. Buck was not a scientist, but he knew enough to shake his head at the simple statement. Rosenwig's formula was fast, making Israel the richest nation on earth, far more profitable than its oil-laden neighbors. Every inch of ground blossomed with flowers and grain, including produce never been before conceivable in Israel. The Holy Land became an export capital, the envy of the world, with virtually zero unemployment. Everyone prospered. The prosperity brought about by the miracle formula changed the course of history for Israel. Flush with cash and resources, Israel made peace with her neighbors. Free trade and liberal passage allowed all who loved the nation to have access to it. What they did not have access to, however, was the formula. Buck had not even asked the old man to reveal the formula or the complicated security process that protected it from any potential enemy. The very fact that Buck was housed by the military evidenced the importance of security. Maintaining the secret ensured the power and independence of the state of Israel. Never had Israel enjoyed such tranquility. The walled city of Jerusalem was only a symbol now, welcomed everyone who embraced peace. The old guard believed God had rewarded them and compensated them for centuries of persecution. Cam Rosenwig was honored throughout the world and revered in his own country. Global leaders sought him out, and he was protected by security systems as complex as those that protected heads of states. As heady as Israel became with no found glory, the nation's leaders were not stupid. A kidnapped and tortured Rosenwig could be forced to reveal a secret that would simply re-evaluate any nation in the world. Imagine what the formula might do if modified to work on the vast terrain of Russia. Could regions bloom through snow cover most of the year? Was this the key to reconstructing a massive nation following the shattering of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics? Russia had become a great brooding giant with a devastating economy and regressed technology. All the nation had was military might, every fair echo going into weaponry. And the switch from rubles to echo had not been a smooth transition for the struggling nation. Streamlining with finance of three major currencies had taken years, but once the change was made, most were happy with it. All of Europe and Russia dealt exclusively in euros. Asia, Africa, and the Middle East traded in yen. North and South Africa and Australia dealt in dollars. A move was afoot to go to one global currency, but those nations that had reluctantly switched once were loath to do it again. Frustrated at their inability to profit from Israel's fortune and determined to dominate and occupy the Holy Land, the Russians had launched an attack against Israel in the middle of the night. The assault had become known as Russian Pearl Harbor, and because of his interview with Rosenwig, Buck Williams was in Hafidi when it happened. Ooh. The Russians sent an international ballistic missiles and nuclear-equipped MiG fighter bombers into the region. The number of aircrafts and warheads made it clear that their mission was annihilation. Damn. To say the Israelis were caught off guard, Carmen Williams had written, was like saying the Great Wall of China was long. When Israel radar picked up the Russians' planes, they were nearly overhead. Israel's frantic plea for support from her immediate neighbors in the United States was simultaneous with her demand to know the intentions of the invaders of her airspace. By the time Israel and her allies had mounted anything close to the fence, it was obvious the Russians would have her outnumbered 100 to 1. Damn. They had only numbers before the destruction would begin. There would be no more negotiating, no more pleas for a sharing of the wealth from the hordes of the North. If the Russians meant only to intimidate and bully, they would not have filled the sky with missiles. Planes could turn back, but the missiles were armed and targeted. So this was no grandstand play designed to bring Israel to her knees. There was no message for the victims. Receiving no explanation for war machines crossing her borders and descending upon her, Israel was forced to defend herself, knowing full well that the first volley would bring about her viral disappearance from the face of the earth. Damn. Just think about it. You looking up in the sky and ain't shit but planes. You're like, God damn. This how we go out. This how we go out. You hear it up there. It's going down. With warning sirens screaming and radio and television sending the doom for what flimsy cover they might find, Israel defended herself for what surely would be the last time in history. The first battery of Israel's surface-to-air missiles hit their marks, and the sky was lit with orange and yellow balls of fire that would certainly do little to slow Russian offense, for which there could be no defense. Those who knew the odds and what the radar screens foretold interpreted the definite explosions in the sky as the Russians' onslaught. Every military leader who knew what was coming expected to be put out of his misery in seconds when the full shed reached the ground and covered the nation. From what he heard and saw in the military compound, Buck Williams knew the end was near. There was no escape. But as the night shone like day and a horrific, deafening explosions continued, nothing on the ground suffered. The building shook and rattled and rumbled, and yet it was not hit. Outside, warplanes slammed to the ground, digging craters and sending burning debris flying. Yet lines of communication stayed open. No other command posts had been hit. No reports of casualties. Nothing destroyed yet. Was this some sort of cruel joke? Sure, the first Israeli missiles had taken out Russian fighters and caused missiles to explode too high to cause more than fire damage on the ground. But what had happened to the rest of the Russian aircrafts? Radar showed they had clearly sent nearly every plane they had, leaving hardly anything in reserve for defense. Thousands of planes swooped down on the tiny country's most populated cities. The roar and the casualty continued. The explosion so horrifying the veteran military leaders buried their faces and screamed in terror. Buck had always wanted to be near the front lines, but his survival instinct was on full throttle. He knew beyond doubt that he would die, and he found himself thinking the strangest thought. Why had he never married? Would there be any remnants of his body for his father and brother to identify? Was there a God? Would death be the end? He crouched behind the console, surprised by the urge to sob. This was not at all what he had expected words to sound like, to look like. He had imagined himself peeking at the action from a safe spot, recording it in his mind of drama. Several minutes into the Holocaust, Buck realized he'd be no more dead outside than in. He felt no bravo, only uniqueness. He would be the only person in this post who would see and know what killed him. He made his way to the door on rubbery legs. No one seemed to notice or care to warn him. It was as if he had been sentenced to death. I ain't gonna stunt. I feel like everybody be like, oh, I be, big. I'm not even gonna stunt. I'm somewhere crying. It's in it. Help. What am I gonna do? Falling apart. Don't look to me. The world end. Don't look to me like Taquise. What are we gonna do? Because I don't know. I'm falling apart. I'm a hot mess. He forced open the door against a furnace blast and had to shield his eyes from the whiteness of the blaze. The sky was afire. He still heard planes over the den and the roar of the fire itself. An occasional exploding missile sent new showers of flame into the air. He stood in stark terror and amazement as the great machines of the world plummeted to the earth all over the city, crashing and burning. But they fell between buildings and in deserted streets and fields. Anything atomic and explosive erupted higher in the atmosphere, and Buck stood there in the heat, his face blistering and his body pouring sweat. What in the world was happening? Then came chunks of ice and hailstone, big as golf balls, forcing Buck to cover his head with his jacket. The earth shook and resounded, throwing him to the ground. Facing down in the freezing shards, he felt rain wash over him. Suddenly the only sound was the fire in the sky, and it began to fade as it drifted lower. After 10 minutes of thunderous roaring, the fire dissipated, and scattered balls of flame flickered on the ground. The firelight disappeared as quick as it had come. Stillness settled over the land. As clouds of smoke wafted away on a gentle breeze, the night sky reappeared in its blue blackness, and stars shone peacefully as if nothing had gone astray. Buck turned back to the buildings, his muddy leather jacket in his fist. The doorknob was still hot, and inside, military leaders' weapons shuddered. The radio was alive with reports from Israel's pilots. They had not been able to get airborne in time to do anything but watch as the entire Russian air defense seemed to destroy itself. Mistractedly, not one casualty was reported in all of Israel. Otherwise, Buck might have believed some mysterious malfunction had caused missile and plane to destroy each other. But witnesses reported that it had been a firestorm, along with rain and hail, and an earthquake that consumed the entire offensive effort. Had it been a divine appointed meteor shower, perhaps? But what accounted for thousands of chunks of burning, twisted, molten steel smashed into the ground in the Hafidi, Jerusalem, Tel Aviv, Jericho, and even Bethlehem, leveling ancient walls, but not so much as scratching one living creature? Daylight revealed the carnage and exposed Russia's secret alliance with Middle Eastern nations, primarily Ethiopia, Libya, and Iran. Among the ruins, the Israelis had found combustible material that would serve as fuel and preserve the nation's reserves for more than 6 years. Special task force completed with buzzers and vultures for the flesh of the enemy dead, trying to bury them before their bones were picked clean and disease threatened the nation. Okay. In the flashback, Buck remembered it vividly, as if it was yesterday. He had not been there and seen it himself. He would not have believed it. And it took more than he had in him to get any reader of Global Weekly to buy it either. Editors and readers had their own explanations for the phenomenon, but Buck admitted, if only to himself, that he became a believer in God that day. Jewish scholars pointed out passages from the Bible that talked about God destroying Israel's enemies with a firestorm, earthquake, hail, and rain. But Buck was stunned when he read Ezekiel 38 and 39 about a great enemy from the north invading Israel with the help of Persia, Libya, and Ethiopia. More stark was that the scripture foretold the weapons of war used as fire, fluid, and enemy soldiers eaten by birds are burned and are buried in a common grave. Okay. Whoop. Christian friends wanted Buck to take the next step and believe in Christ, now that he was so clearly spiritually attuned. He wasn't prepared to get that far, but he was certainly a different person and a different journalist from then on. To him, nothing was beyond belief. Okay. Where we going now? We're going back to the captain. All right. Not sure whether he'll follow through with any oversight. Captain Raymond Steele felt an irresistible urge to see Haiti Durham right then. Okay. Okay. Okay, let's go see him. He unstrapped himself and squeezed his first officer's shoulder on the way out of the cockpit. "We're still on auto, Christopher," he said, as the younger man roused and straightened his headphones. "I'm going to make the sun up stroll." Christopher skirted and licked his lips. "Doesn't look like sun up to me, Cap. Probably another hour or two. I'll see if anybody's stirring anyway." Okay. "Roger, if they are, tell him Chris said hey." Rayford snorted and nodded. As he opened the cockpit door, Haiti Durham nearly bowled him over. "No need to knock," he said. "I'm coming." The senior flight attendant pulled him into the gallery, but there was no passion in her touch. Her fingers felt like talons on his forearm, and her body shuddered in the darkness. "Haiti?" She pressed him back against the cooking compact, her face close to his. Had she not been clearly terrified, he might have enjoyed this and returned her embrace. Her knees buckled as she tried to speak, and her voice came in a whiny squeal. "People are missing," she managed in a whisper, burying her head in his chest. He took her shoulders and tried to push her back, but she fought to stay close. What do you mean?" She was sobbing now, her body out of control. "A whole bunch of people just gone." "Haiti, this is Big Plane. They wanted to the lofts or..." She pulled his head down so she could speak directly into his ear. Despite her weeping, she was plainly fighting to make herself understood. "I've been everywhere. I'm telling you, dozens of people are missing." "Haiti, it's still dark. We're fine." "I'm not crazy. See for yourself. All over the plane, people have just disappeared." "It's a joke. They're hiding, trying to... Ray, their shoes, their socks, their clothes, everything was left behind. These people are gone." Haiti slipped from his grips and knelt whimpering in a corner. Rayford wanted to comfort her, to enlist her help, or to get Chris to go with him through the plane. More than anything, he wanted to believe the woman was crazy. She knew better than to put him on. It was obvious she really believed people had disappeared. He had been daydreaming in the cockpit. Was he asleep now? He bit his lip hard and whined at the pain. So he was wide awake. He stepped in the first class, where an elderly woman sat stunned in the pre-dawn haze, her husband's sweater and trousers in her hands. "What in the world?" she said. "Harold?" Rayford scanned the rest of first class. Most passengers were still asleep, including the young man by the window, his laptop computer on the tray table. But indeed, several seats were empty. As Rayford's eyes grew accustomed to the low light, he strolled quickly to the stairway. He startled down, but the woman called to him. "Sir, my husband?" Rayford put a finger to his lips and whispered, "I know. We'll find him. I'll be right back." What nonsense, he thought as he descended, aware of Haiti right behind him. "But find him?" Haiti grabbed his shoulder as he slowed. Should I turn on the cabin lights?" "No," he whispered. "The less people know right now, the better." Rayford wanted to be strong, to have answers, to be an example to his crew, to Haiti. But when he reached the lower level, he knew the rest of the flight would be chaotic. He was as scared as anyone on board. As he scanned the seats, he nearly panicked. He backed into a secluded spot behind the bulkhead and slapped himself hard on the cheek. This was no joke, no trick, no dream. Something was terribly wrong, and there was no place to run. There would be enough confusion and terror without his losing control. Nothing had prepared him for this, and he would be the one everyone would look to. But for what? What was he supposed to do? First one, then another one cried out when they realized their seatmates were missing, but their clothes were still there. They cried, they screamed, they leaped from their seats. Haiti grabbed Rayford from behind and wrapped her arms so tight around his chest that he could hardly breathe. "Rayford, what is it?" He pulled her hands apart and turned to face her. "Haiti, listen, I don't know any more than you do, but we gotta calm these people and get to the ground. I'll make some kind of announcement, and you and your people keep everyone in their seats, okay?" She nodded, but she didn't look okay at all. As he edged past her to hurry back to the cockpit, he heard her scream. So much for calming the passengers, he thought, all as he rose to see her on her knees in the aisle. She lifted a blazer shirt and tie still intact. Trousers lay at her feet. Haiti frantically turned the blazer to the low light and read the name tag. "Tony," she wailed. "Tony's gone!" Rayford snatched the clothes from her and tossed them behind the bulkhead. He lifted Haiti by her elbows and pulled her out of sight. "Haiti, we're out on touchdown. We can't have a plane load of historic people. I'm going to make an announcement, but you have to do your job. Can you?" She nodded, her eyes vacant. He forced her to look at him. "Will you?" he said. She nodded again. "Rayford, are we going to die?" No, he said, that I'm sure of. But he wasn't sure of anything. How could he know? He'd rather have faced an engine fire or even an uncontrolled dive or crash into the ocean. Had to be better than this. How would he keep people calm in such a nightmare? But now keeping the cabin lights off was doing more harm than good, and he felt glad to be able to give Haiti a specific assignment. I don't know what I'm going to say, he said, but get the lights on so we can make an accurate record of who's here and who's gone. And then we'll get more of those foreign visitors declaration forms. For what? Just do it. Have them ready. Rayford didn't know if he had done the right thing by leaving Haiti in charge of passengers and crew. As he raced up the stairs, he caught sight of another lieutenant backing out of the gallery screaming. By now, Per Christopher in the cockpit was the only one on the plane unaware what was happening. Rayford had told Haiti he didn't know what was happening any more than she did. The terrifying truth was he knew all too well. Irene had been right. He and most of his passengers had been left behind. Oh! Y'all hit that comment, leave a like, do all that shit. Yeah, you get it? Don't make me come for you.